And now to our daily deep dive. The global pandemic upended not only education systems across the country, but how we think about education itself. With colleges across the country canceling in person classes, students were stuck going to college from their high school bedrooms. And that made many rethink the value proposition. Was taking on the enormous debt that attending college required still worth it? Here to help me dig into it, NYU marketing professor and serial entrepreneur, Scott Galloway. Hey, Scott.
How are you, Rena?
Great. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You know, my South Asian parents would be upset for me asking this question, but is college really worth it?
It's situational. I'm talking to a young man today who got into Yale, but is thinking about going to a local college so he can play basketball. And my job is to reach through the phone and grab him by the vest and shake him and go, don't be crazy. If you get into an elite university,
Yeah.
it's still a difficult certification to turn down because whether we like it or not, we are very brand driven and very certification driven in our economy. So if you have the opportunity to get what I would call an elite certification from a top 100 school, it's still a fantastic return on investment. Now, having said that, some of the progress we're making is that we recognize 2/3 of our youth will likely not end up with a traditional BA, and we're thinking about, all right, how do we build on-ramps for them into the global economy? Now, going to a second-tier school and taking on $250,000 in debt when your family, really doesn't have those resources, I think that's where it gets more difficult and less obvious around whether it's actually worth it. I think what we're questioning is this religious-like truism that was supposed to be a truism and isn't, that you have failed as a parent if your kid doesn't get a traditional four-year college degree. And there's a cartel where we downshift people from elite universities that have very low acceptance rates to second-tier schools. They raise prices in tandem, most corrupt cartel in the world. And unfortunately, a lot of middle-class kids end up paying a Mercedes price for a Hyundai product.
A Mercedes price for a Hyundai product. Wow, that's so well put. Is a college degree necessary?
Unfortunately, the greatest kind of wealth creator in the history of the modern economy is the U.S. corporation. People romanticize entrepreneurs such as myself, but the reality is, on a risk-adjusted basis, if you can get a job at an incredible platform called a Fortune 500 U.S. company, it's a great way to get rich slowly. They'll pay for your health care. They're mindful organizations. They invest in their employees. So that really is, on a risk-adjusted basis, there's nothing like it in terms of providing economic security for people. They're tremendous platforms. It is easier to get into one of these organizations with an AR-15 than without a college degree. And probably the most important thing in higher education that happened in the last 12 months happened outside of higher education, and that is some great firms ranging from Apple to Xerox to Tesla have said that they're going to carve out a meaningful percentage of entry-level jobs and provide them for people without traditional college degrees. They're going to try and move towards a more skills-based assessment as opposed to what the majority of us have done, and that is move towards a pure certification-based assessment. Because when you're a corporation and you decide that you're going to only hire people with college degrees, right there you've said, we're going to hire fewer Black and Latino people. Right there you've said, we're going to hire fewer kids from single-parent homes. Because these communities are underrepresented in traditional kind of elite colleges. So I still think it's a great deal. Do you still need it? I'd like to think that the need is going to degrade a little bit and that we're going to make greater investments in vocational programming, but there's still no getting around it. It's incredibly powerful. It's incredible certification. We in my industry have lost the script. We no longer see ourselves as public servants. We see ourselves as luxury brands, and we need to dramatically expand the number of freshman seats at world-class universities.
What I'm hearing from you is, okay, you get into an Ivy League, of course, you go, it's worth it, do it. But most people can't get into an Ivy League. How do we rethink education? And should there be another track for these students who won't make it into Ivy Leagues?
Yeah, so the Ivy League gets a lot of attention. We're sort of obsessed with it because they're wonderful universities. And I thought, and I predicted this, I predicted that these amazing brands, MIT, Harvard, Stanford, would partner with big tech, dramatically expand their enrollments, and sop up all this excess demand that their brands warrant. I was absolutely wrong. They have doubled down on exclusivity. Harvard got 55,000 applications, admitted 1,400 students. They sit on an endowment that's equivalent to about $30 million per student. They could increase their freshman class tenfold without any sacrifice of any quality. They have the resources, but they've decided they want to be Hermes. They're not public servants. So the bottom line is write them off. They're not here for the Commonwealth. They're not here for the better good. They're here such that the faculty and administrators can pay themselves more every day and feel good about being Chanel or Hermes. Where we do make change in the US is through our great public universities, where 2 out of 3 young adults end up. And I think that the way we need to reimagine things are, one, first off, we need to acknowledge we're going to have a lot of kids who don't end up with traditional 4-year college degrees and need to figure out a formal on-ramp into the economy for them. For those that do want to get a traditional 4-year degree, I think we need a grand bargain between alumni, the faculty and administrators, and the people, the state legislatures who fund these universities. We need additional funding from the state and from the alumni, and then the administrators in return have to guarantee or have to commit to using small and big tech to dramatically expand the supply such that maybe we don't reduce total cost, but we reduce cost per student. So the public universities need to recognize they're public servants. We need to fall back in love with the unremarkable and start letting in great kids, just not freakishly remarkable kids. But I think the way we reimagine is we incorporate technology, we hold universities accountable for lowering the cost and increasing the supply, and we as alumni and as voters have to recognize, or ideally should recognize, that one of the great gifts of the United States is higher education that reaches into middle class and lower income households and pulls out kids that aren't necessarily remarkable. There's some good news here. If you're a remarkable kid in the inner city, you can find Harvard and Harvard will find you. But I can prove to each one of us that 99% of our children will not be in the top 1%. So we need to move back to falling back in love with what I'd call the unremarkables. Good kids that aren't necessarily great by the time they're 18.
I went to George Washington University, was a freshman in 1997. Scott, I don't know that I would be able to get into that school today. Do you worry that, maybe some second tier universities were seeing a decline as they're trying to rethink this?
Well, I can answer that for you. And the answer is no, you wouldn't get in. I mean, or at least the majority of us wouldn't get into our schools.
I like your faith in me. Thank you, Scott.
We constantly brag or say, well, I could never get into UCLA now. Well, I could never get into George Washington now. Well, guess what? That means your daughter's not getting in. That's not anything to be proud of. There's just something exceptionally unkind about that. The biggest issue here, college is transformative. It's transformative. The reason you and I are here is because of George Washington and UCLA, or that's a key component of why we're here. If college represents where we're headed as a nation, where we have morphed is our economy used to be about giving the top 50% a chance to be in the top 10%. You couldn't, not just anybody could get into college, and nor should they. There should be standards. But if you were good to great, you were going to get into a good to great school. Now what we've decided collectively is that our role in higher education, and more broadly our role as an economy, is to identify the top 1% and turn them into billionaires. That's not what America's about. America is about churning out millionaires, not trying to identify the next billionaire.
So, Scott, I want to ask you a little bit about the economy and business needs. We're seeing this profound worker shortage across the country. How does higher education affect business?
I don't want to say it's outside of higher ed, but the reality is you get a 4-year college degree, the unemployment rate is like 3%. If you go to not even a remarkable school, just a good school, even through the recessions, the unemployment rate among college grads was fairly low. I think the average salary out of undergrad at NYU is 80-something thousand. Coming out of business school, it's 140,000. So coming out of NYU, you're immediately in the top 10%, maybe even the top 2 or 3% of income earning households at the age of 22 or 29, which is the average age of our business school graduates. There's a tension between capital and labor. Labor's gotten the crap kicked out of it for the last 30 years. Since 2008, the NASDAQ has quintupled. The average pay of a CEO has gone from 60 times earnings to 300 times earnings, and minimum wage has exploded from $7.25 to $7.25. And we seem to be, including in the media, just kind of mildly outraged and shocked that people don't want to work 40 hours a week so they can live in their cars. So, for the first time, because of the massive stimulus and the CARES Act, it feels like labor finally has a seat at the table and is able to bring some of the bargaining power that every other constituency have, whether it's shareholders demanding changes in management, whether it's information age workers who've always had more demand than supply. It feels for the first time our frontline workers have a little bit of negotiating leverage. And I find it quite frankly kind of disheartening and strange that everyone seems so kind of mildly outraged that people don't want to come to work for $7 an hour plus tips. A lot of these businesses should go away. If they can't afford to pay their people a living wage and you're a restaurant and they're saying, well, I might go out of business. Well, boss, you should be out of business. We don't need businesses like that.
What do you think overall this pandemic has done for higher education and our outlook on higher education?
So COVID-19's, I think, enduring feature, it'll be seen as an accelerant more than a change agent. And typically, what it's ushered in is this massive era of innovation and digitization. Once there is kind of cheap capital, venture technology comes in a significant way, you see consolidation. And we're seeing that to a certain extent here, and that is applications to the top 100 schools are up 20+%. Berkeley, they're up 28%. NYU, they're up low 20s. Harvard, they're up 30s. What's upsetting is that we're seeing, as you referenced, fewer and fewer applications to junior colleges, and we're even seeing fewer applications for Pell Grants, which is really disheartening because what it means is if you're in that weight class, you're consolidating the power. These schools are getting more elite, more exclusive, more expensive, and basically they've said that we are here for two cohorts. The first is what I call, talked about before, the freakishly remarkable. The second is the children of wealthy people. If you're a child of a household that's in the top 1%, you get this, Rena, 77 times more likely to get into an elite university. 5 of the Ivies and 32 of the 100 top universities have more kids from the top 1% than the bottom 60%. And this is so fucked up. You know who doesn't need college? You know who doesn't need college?
Who?
The top 1%.
You're right.
They show up with outstanding educations. They show up with outstanding networks. Quite frankly, they probably have higher EQ. They've been exposed to different nations. They've been exposed to possibly more resources at home in terms of childcare and child rearing. They're the people that need college the least. But we've decided our job is to create a European-style caste system. We have to go back to this notion that higher ed reclaims its rightful position as a place where we give good kids great opportunities, not freakishly remarkable and rich kids immense opportunities to maintain their dynasties.
Scott, it's been such a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks, Rena.
Thanks.